Good evening. On behalf of Countryside Community Church, I want to welcome you to this Center for Faith Studies event tonight. We're really excited to have you here and really excited by our guest this evening, Ani Zonneveld. I've been particularly looking forward to this event because I had the honor of meeting Ani this last summer at the Wild Goose Festival in North Carolina, where I was asked to interview her as part of a forum on convergence Christianity. And this convergence thing that's going on is rather interesting, and the Wild Goose Festival is really a part of it, where you have these folks who used to be on very opposite ends of the Christian spectrum, who've all kind of had problems with their native traditions for one reason or another and have left that and been wandering out in the wilderness, and when they find each other they discover they have a lot of very, very similar hopes, dreams, and values. And so those are the kind of Christians that show up at this Wild Goose Festival. But what's pretty amazing is that if you talk to these convergence-oriented Christians who are finding all this common ground, and you talk to a progressive Muslim or you talk to a progressive Jew, you find that there's this common ground extends well beyond one particular faith tradition, which really, to me, is a sign of just the bubbling up of spiritual energy in this country and well beyond it. And Ani is certainly a part of that. But I'll let Leslie introduce her formally. I just can't help expressing a bit of excitement about Ani, and you're going to fall in love with her if you haven't met her already tonight. But if you are new to Countryside, we want to especially welcome you and thank you for coming. And if you need just two items of information I could supply. One is if you have one of these, please turn them to off or vibrate, what have you, out of consideration for our speaker. And then afterwards, if you would care to join us for some refreshment and fellowship, we'd love to join you in conversation out in the foyer there. And if you need to use a bathroom, just simply go to the left, and you'll hit the wall and make another left, and you'll find restrooms there. So let me, without further ado, invite forward, actually for the last time, our interim director for the Center for Faith Studies, Leslie Murrell. And the reason I'm saying last time is not because she's being fired or quitting or anything like that. She's still going to be. But we'll have a special announcement to make on Sunday about the Center for Faith Studies and a permanent director. So it's an honor to be able to have you up here and thank you for your term of service as interim director. You've been wonderful, and we really appreciate your help during this period.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for taking your time to join us tonight. We welcome each of you here, as well as our viewers watching online through Darkwood Brew on a live stream. A video of this presentation will be available at centerforfaithstudies.org if you're interested in watching it again or sharing it with your friends. It'll take a couple of days to get it up onto the website, but it will be available. If you'd like to get more information for Center for Faith Studies events, please be sure to fill out, there's cards out there in the foyer. You're welcome to fill them out, and we'll get your email address, and we'll send you all kinds of emails about upcoming events and information. Also, if you'd like to take a look at our upcoming events in our program here, we have some really exciting guests coming pretty soon here, so take a look at that. And you can also like us on Facebook, and that's usually updated pretty speedily if you ever need updated information. After Ani's presentation, we'll have time for a brief question and answer period. We have volunteers with microphones that come to the end of the aisles. So if you can make your way to the end of the aisle and speak clearly into the microphone for our guests that are watching online, that'd be great. And let's see here. Please keep your questions to questions. That's what we like to say here. And if you have any comments or discussion you'd like to further go for out in the foyer, we'll have cookies and coffee available for refreshments and discussion with Ani. We do have an amazing group of volunteers. That's one of the things I've learned through being an interim Center for Faith Studies director, is the amazing volunteers. I just They just show up and do everything for me. And so I really am grateful to them. Thank you so much for taking such good care of me. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please just raise your hand or go find a person with a blue ribbon on, and they will take care of you and help you out. Center for Faith Studies encourages study of what it means to be the community of people through whom God is experienced. We seek forceful speakers who are committed to the issues they address, offering balance over the range of their programs rather than within each presentation. After spending just a few moments with Ani, I'm immediately inspired by her fierce commitment to not only her faith, but also who she is, a female singer-songwriter and an activist. She is not just a spark of hope, but a constant guiding light. In talking with her about the challenges of what it means to be an active progressive Muslim, one thing I've realized is how similar our struggles are and where our hearts truly are in our faiths. I hope you enjoy spending time with her this evening as much as I have these last few days. Please help me welcome Ani Zonneveld to the podium.
Good evening. Thank you for making it out here in the rain. I appreciate that. Yes, my name is Ani Zonneveld, and thank you, Eric, and for the community church for inviting me to speak. I flew in from Los Angeles last night and had a marvelous time hanging out with Leslie and tasted Omaha steak, which is a necessity. So I'll start my talk. Progressive Muslims, Progressive Islam, and his lived-out realities. I will start first with a little bit about myself. I'm born and raised a Muslim, originally from Malaysia. My heritage is Malay, but part of my dad's heritage is Indian, and part of my mom's heritage is Arab, and it starts from the spice trade centuries ago. So I'm a bit mixed. When I was about 2.5 years old, I moved to Germany. I lived in Germany, Egypt, and India for a total of 16 years. My dad was a diplomat, so I had the luxury of experiencing this diverse world experiences that no textbook could teach you. And one of the experiences that I learned at a very, very young age, being Malaysian, it's a society that is very mixed in race and in religion. We have Hindus, Christians, Muslims, the whole nine yards, and everyone is practicing their faith traditions openly and freely so. So at a young age, I was exposed to diversity. But it didn't hit home until I was in Germany. I was about 5 years old, and I went to the British school. And we were gathered for assembly every morning, and we would pray to Jesus. And so I came home and I asked my mom, "What do I do? I wasn't comfortable with that." And my mom bent over and advised me, "Just substitute Jesus for Allah, and you'll be fine." And we are all praying to the same God. So this is the essence, the background from which I grew, that I was raised, and the exposure that I was exposed to, and that sort of shapes my worldview about people, about religion, about cultures. And as a Muslim, I find this beautifully expressed in the Quran. It doesn't contradict my upbringing. If anything, the Quran accentuates that and verifies and upholds those values of diversity of religion. There is a beautiful verse in the Quran which, for me, says it all. We have created you man and woman for you to learn from each other, and we have created you man and woman into nations and states for you to learn from each other and for you to not hate each other. And so God is the best creator, the most creative of them all, and we should just stop fighting each other and start loving each other and learning from each other. And that is the essence, and that is the impetus, and that is the work that we do at Muslims for Progressive Values, but more personally so myself. So, what is Progressive Islam and how did that start? 9/11. When I was 18 years old, my parents packed me off and to the United States, and I was very much into music. That was my first passion. And they said, no, you're going to the United States and you're going to do something useful with your life. You're going to get an education. You are going to study economics and political science. Yes, I had no say in this. So I did. I graduated, and I said to my dad, okay, I kept my promise, so let me do what I want to do, and I really want to do music. So I moved to Los Angeles, and not knowing anyone there, I basically started from scratch, waiting tables, making ends meet that way, and networking, and finding my way into the music business, which is such a dog-eat-dog world. It's just so different from the world of diplomacy, where there is etiquette, there is quorum. In the music business, anything goes, and people make up their rules on their own terms. So it was I was really a fish out of water on so many different levels. But finally, I made my way in. I became somewhat of a successful writer. I've won awards, but I was always a closeted Muslim. I never came out as a Muslim. That was a very private matter. And when 9/11 happened, I was forced out of that closet. I no longer could say to myself and live with myself being closeted. So I can understand when LGBT Muslims stay closeted. It's not a nice space. It's not a fulfilling place to be in. It compromises your identity, and I was compromising my own identity. So what I did after 9/11 was to study Islam, and I made a conscientious decision. And this was the promise, and I remember this again like it was yesterday. I promised myself that in my journey of restudying Islam, if I leave Islam, so be it. If I come closer because of that, then so be it. And what I found was the Islam that I was able to shed, which was the cultural practices, and the pure Islam that I was able to learn from the Quran and from the studies that I put into, it liberated me. It liberated me from the gender inequalities that I was raised in. And granted, my parents were very pragmatic in the way they raised us. They pushed me as a girl as hard as they pushed my brothers. And it was never a gender issue, but there was still the underlying gender issue when it came to our Islamic practices. I remember when I was about 12 years old, I started doing the azan, which was the call for prayer. And my mom, the same mom that gave me this fabulous lesson in life, came to me and says, no, you got to stop. And she was frantically trying to stop me from doing the azan. And I'm like, why? And said, well, because you're a girl and you can't do an azan. You're not allowed to. And that was like one negative notch against Islam for me. And it didn't feel right. And there were other gender issues that kept rubbing into my face as I became a woman, as I, come to fruition, right? And there's this issue that if you're menstruating, you can't touch the Quran, you cannot pray because you're dirty. So all these gender issues started really flying in my face. That was unacceptable to me because I found that to be very prejudiced. How could God be creating me at the same time and having these prejudices against me? I am the childbearer. I am the woman that brings life to earth, right? So there's something wrong with this picture. And so that 12-year-old girl, 13-year-old girl to this mature woman after 9/11, and I can't remember how old I was then. I'm 51. So, and then relearning Islam and connecting the dots now, I understood better that this was a cultural interpretation and this is not the Quran, the very Quran that I'm reading. And that really unshackled me from a lot of the gender issues, the cultural issues that I was raised in. And the cultural issues that I was raised in is nothing compared to some of the other cultural issues that I will address later on as we go through the slides. So as a songwriter, producer, I thought, well, I can write songs in my sleep. What a better way than to write Islamic pop songs. I could sing them. I'm not into singing and standing up front in front of the microphone. I'm much more comfortable behind the scenes. But this would be a good reason for me to step out, for me to come out of the closet, for me to make a statement, for me to educate people, Muslims and otherwise, because I felt Muslims themselves were out of touch with what I was understanding of the Quran and the community that I was in, which was traditional. So I started writing these Islamic pop songs, thinking, well, the Muslim community is going to love me for it, I'm going to be accepted, and the non-Muslim community is going to appreciate that I'm actually trying to teach them something different from what they know Islam is to be, and that was the terrorists of 9/11. So, lo and behold, I was really shocked that I came up against a lot of resistance of selling my CD, and 95% of the Muslim retailers would not sell it, and the reason was because, number one, I used full musical instrumentation, and according to their interpretation of Islam, music should only be percussive. So only percussion accompanied with a vocal, and the vocalist should only be male. So back again to when I was 12 years old, cannot do the call for prayer. I get it. Those are the dots that I was connecting. And I'm like, okay, not again. I can't believe this. From not allowed to do the azan to not allowed to sing because I was a woman. So, but then I know from my studies, from my learning, we've had centuries of female singers in our heritage. So this new concept of women not being allowed to sing is a new concept because we've always had female speakers, female teachers in Islam, and female performers and writers and poets and scholars. So this is a new phenomenon that's happening in Islam. It's not an old phenomenon. The fact that Islam has always given women's rights. So what's going on? So I was not going to take this laying down. So I decided if I can't find that sort of community in the established community, I'm going to create my own Muslim community that I get along with, that appreciates art, that is not weighted down with this cultural baggage of the Islam that we know. And so January 6, 2006, I started a progressive Muslim group community in Los Angeles. It's very small, and I was really happy to find out there were a lot of other Muslims that felt the same way as I did. And thanks to other social media forums and Meetup.com, we found out there were other pockets of progressive Muslim communities all throughout the United States. And so with the music came the understanding that it forced me not only into creating Islamic content, musical content for me to speak and sing about Islam, but music was a powerful tool for me to connect with non-Muslims especially. And I'm going to sing 2 songs for you at the end of this talk. And it is a very beautiful way, it is the most non-controversial and non-confrontational way of reaching out across the aisle. And I could see between the end of the song, from the beginning of the song to the end of the song, how people's hearts and minds would change through a song. So that was my gift, and I was starting to realize that I wasn't here in the United States to do economics and political science. I was here in the United States to practice my musical art form, and then I'm here in the United States also to take this musical art form to another level. So that was the journey that I was starting to realize, and then there was this fork on the road, and then my dad's voice just kept echoing in my head, and that always to make my life count. And that was something that was brainwashed with, always to make my life count. And this was one way to make my life count. So I stand here as one of the many talks I've done in contributing to that cause. The music forced me to, like I said, to take this sharp turn from just a secular music to one of spiritual and educational. And what was really interesting is that it also forced me to educate myself, and it forced me in a way to also to not be shy about my faith, to not be shy about what I stand for as a human being, as a Muslim, and as a progressive Muslim woman on top of it. So moving on, by this time I have done 3 CDs. Wake Up was the first one. It was the pop Islamic songs, and one is more interfaith in nature, and it builds on the common denominators that we have as faith practitioners. And Islamic hymn is the new genre that I created, which I will explain a little bit more later. So this is Muslims for Progressive Values. It's an organization that I founded and that I've been leading since its inception, 2007. We were founded in 2007 at a founding meeting in New York at Sarah Lawrence College. It started out very simple. That is, we wanted to create community in our various little cities. And it was a way for us to connect with each other, to practice our Islam in the most egalitarian and inclusive manner. And but several years later, here we are, not just here in the United States, but internationally as well. And this is what our community looks like. It's very diverse. It's young and old. It's converts. It's straight, LGBTs, and everything in between, including trans Muslims. We are truly inclusive, and when we say we are inclusive and egalitarian, it's not just in words, it is in practice. As you can see, there's a picture of us praying there, and there's a better picture later on where we encourage women to lead prayer. We encourage LGBTs to also to participate in spiritual leadership. We are not here to replace patriarchy with matriarchy, because we know matriarchy can be just as awful. But we are here to practice the true spirit of Islam, which is equality. And I say this because when you look at Mecca, and when you look at the sea of white people, men, women, all wearing white, you see the essence of the simplicity of what Islam is supposed to be, the equality that is supposed to dictate our faith practice. But that is not how we are practicing it. Far from it. If you look at Mecca now, the way Islam is being practiced now, the patriarchy system is very entrenched in our faith tradition, in our practices. Women are second-class citizens. In some mosques in America, it used to be we could sit socially unsegregated, but in the last 20, 25 years, some mosques in America have become extremely conservative is not the right word. Women are forced to enter through the back door. Now, in America, entering through the back door does not ring well. So that with the lack of women voices in the mosque, this has led to a lot of uprising within the Muslim community, especially educated Muslim women. They are educated, they are in the workforce, they are professionals coming into a spiritual space that they identify with, that discriminate against them, is not exactly one that they would put up with, not here in America. So the first 10 principles is identity, and therefore it's simply, if you identify yourself as Muslim, then you are Muslim. We don't question you. We don't question, why do you have a beard, or why don't you have a beard, Nizam? We don't question you, how can you be LGBT and Muslim? We don't question you, why do you drink and you call yourself Muslim? We don't question you, how many times do you pray? We don't have any of those benchmarks. If you identify yourself Muslim, then you are. You're welcome. And the second principle is equality. And like I was saying, equality is not just a word, but truly the way we practice our faith. When we have spiritual equality, that's a different level. We encourage women, for example, to take spiritual leadership, and we do that on the basis of scholarship as well. We get accused a lot of reinventing Islam in America, but we're not reinventing Islam. We're actually going back to what Islam was when Prophet Muhammad started. The fact that the first female imam was appointed by Prophet Muhammad. A lot of Muslims don't know that because we were not taught that. And there's a reason why we were not taught that, right? And I think there's a lot of other faith traditions that also have experiences when it comes to gender inequalities. It's entrenched in patriarchy, and we are perpetuating those false teachings. And so no more here in the United States, we're not putting up with that. We are flushing out the skeletons. We're hanging out dirty laundry to dry in the sun. And in California, there's a lot of sun, and we are going back to the roots, and we're using scholarship. So for the last 7-8 years, we've been our work has been rooted in sacred texts and in scholarship, and that's how we've built our foundation. And because we've built our foundation on this, we have not been able to no one's been able to knock us out. The conservatives and everyone have not been able to delegitimize us because of this. So that's how we built our foundation. Separation of religion and state. Authorities, this is really important. This is not just in the United States, because here you see the conservative Christian legislators legislating their Christian interpretation into law. That's your equivalent of Christian Sharia law, in my opinion. So when we have Muslim states claiming to be Islamic and they're enforcing what they say is an Islamic edict, Sharia, that is not Islamic. So there needs to be a separation of religious and state. And I'll go a little bit deeper in here, because we talk about Sharia law. The thing is, nobody knows, most of the time, people don't even know what Sharia law is. There is no such thing as Sharia law in Islam. There is such a thing as Sharia, which is a path to salvation, living yourself through the middle path, not in extremes. And you have that too in Christianity. There's also the middle path in Judaism as well. And that is also in Islam. But it was not mandated. It's not a law. You have the right. God gave you the capacity to think for yourself. And at the end of the day, that is how you, as a Muslim, are going to be judged, by the choices you make in life, whether it's a good deed or a bad deed. Now, if you're going to be enforced to live your life in a certain way, that takes away that right, that your God-given right to make that decision, from which you're going to be judged on, right? So, when all these Muslim nations call themselves Muslim, that's also questionable. How can you call Muslim or Islamic State when you're so unjust? There are criteria to being a Muslim. There are criteria to call yourself an Islamic State. So that's also questionable. So we feel that there should be a separation of church, religious institution and state, and then particularly in the Muslim majority countries, when they use religion to empower their political might. We've seen this day in and day out. Freedom of speech. This is also really important, because freedom of speech is oppressed in Muslim majority countries. And I'll give you one perfect example. There is a young man by the name of Raif Badawi, who's a Saudi, and he set up a website called Liberal Muslim website. And he advocates for a different way of thinking, more pragmatic way of thinking about Islam. And he challenged the religious authority, and that was his mistake. He challenged the committee to promote goodness, what's it? It's not just. I have to go back to it, but the one that monitors whether you do good or whether you're dressed properly or not, or whether your hair is showing or not. That committee, they go around and start monitoring their citizens. And he challenged them, why is it Valentine's Day is banned in Saudi Arabia? And because of that, one of the reasons was he was thrown in jail. He was sentenced to 7 years in jail and up to 600 lashes. So this is the lack of freedom of speech, of expression in Saudi Arabia. And in many Muslim countries, there is a degree of oppression when it comes to freedom of speech. And this is also the antithesis of what Islam is. Because during Prophet Muhammad's days, he was ridiculed, he was condemned, he never flinched. There's a really beautiful story about Prophet Muhammad. There was a lady who, day in and day out, would throw trash on his front porch or in his front home. And day in and day out. And he would pick it up and he would throw it away. He would pick it up and he would throw it away, day in and day out. He would never complain. He never sent anyone to harm her. But then one day there was no trash there. And his first reaction is, I wonder how she's doing. Right? And he went and visited her, and she was ill. So this is the beauty this is the kind-heartedness, the compassion of this Prophet Muhammad that we know in Islam. But this is not how Muslims are practicing their Islam. And I'm sad to see this, because they dress like Prophet Muhammad, they grow their beard like Prophet Muhammad, they want to eat like him with the right hand, they do the right steps into the doorway and so on and so forth. But they're so superficial. The true values of Prophet Muhammad and Islam is not being practiced. So I wanted to say this story because there's so much negative story in media about Muslims and the acts of Muslims, and it's been framed as according to Sharia law and according to Islamic values and culture. But that is not what Islamic values and culture should be. And that's what we need to be challenging, and that is what Muslims for Progressive Values have been challenging. Universal human rights, and that's, again, a no-brainer. It's the essence of what Islam is about. The first converts to Islam were women, slaves, and the poor. And why? Because the faith of Islam at that particular time empowered them. But that's not what we see in the Muslim world. It's still very tribal in its interpretation. Women's rights, oh boy. Where do we begin? The women's rights that we advocate for here in the United States is very different from that we advocate for in Europe, and very different from what we advocate for in the Muslim majority countries. In Malaysia, it's very different than what we advocate for in Pakistan, for example, or in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, it's as basic as the right to drive and the right to travel without the consent of a male guardian. But Prophet Muhammad's wife was a businesswoman. It was her wealth that sustained the early Muslim community. So for the same piece of land to have such a contrasting, opposing, completely at the other end of the spectrum way of practicing Islam is shocking. And so non-Muslims look at Saudi Arabia as supposedly the representative of what Islam is, but it isn't. It's far from the truth. So on gender equality, we've got a long way to go. But gender equality in Islam, as in the sacred texts, is very supportive of women's rights, but the actual practice isn't. So let me give you an example of female genital mutilation. This has been a brutal practice, cultural practice. It's not Islamic. It's actually based in several cultures, whether it be Christian, paganism, and Islam. But it is restricted to pockets of cultures in the North African and the African continent. But what is sad to see is that it's been framed in the Muslim community anyway as a religious right, as a religious practice. And what the positive news that I have to share with you is the fact that women organizations based in those Muslim countries have been working with local imams and challenging the imams. So where does it say in the Quran that this is an Islamic practice? And the beautiful part about it is that these imams, male, have been going back and restudying, reassessing the Quran, studying it for themselves, and then coming back to these women organizations saying, you know what, you were right. This is not an Islamic practice. And there's a document out there called Making Waves. You should check it out. And it talks about this particular issue and how these imams have gone back to their villages and re-educated primarily the women who have been practicing this FGM. So there is positive changes that's happening on the ground, and it has to come from sacred texts. You cannot argue these practices that are framed as religious in secular language. It doesn't work. On the issue of here in the United States, I'll give you an example of what's happening here in the United States the practice, there's a belief in Islam culturally that a Muslim woman cannot marry non-Muslim men. A Muslim man can marry people of the book. But it doesn't say this in the Quran. It only says in the Quran that a Muslim woman should marry a believer. So why are Muslim women being put in such a small box of who they can and cannot marry? So one of the services that we at Muslims for Progressive Values offer is to marry Muslim women to non-Muslim men, because many Muslim women are marrying outside the faith. Because Muslim men can outside the faith, they have been marrying outside the faith. That's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is that their family wants them to marry women from their home countries. So they go back, they marry, and they bring them back to the United States, even the American Muslim men here. So we're finding that Muslim women are sort of caught with not much of a choice. In the Quran, well, traditionally what happens is this. Centuries ago, or even now, even if you look at India, the Hindu tradition, when a Hindu woman marries, they become, in some bad instances, they become the slave of the in-laws, the men's family. We've read atrocious stories about this, right? So this is a South Asian, it tends to be very South Asian, it tends to be a very tribal practice as well, and similarly in Islam as well. So back in the days, when women married married their man, they became part of the man's tribe. They lost their name, they lost their identity, they couldn't visit their family. They had to adopt the religious and the cultural practices of the husband. Right? So when Islam came along, what is mandated in the Quran is something called nikah, which is basically, in modern terms, it's like the prenuptial agreement. So basically, it's a contract, it's a marriage contract. And you as a woman can dictate what you want and what you don't want your husband to, preconditions for a divorce, and what have you. And back in the days, it would be basic needs of a woman, like on my mother's birthday, I want to be able to go visit her. That would be in the contract. Obviously now, we live here in America in a society where the woman gets half, right? At least in California. I don't know how it is in Nebraska. So these are some of the women's rights that was given 1,400 years ago. We had women were allowed to work outside the home. This is in the Quran. And the income that the woman earns, the woman is allowed to keep for herself. She does not have to share it with her family. It is hers to keep. So this is the kind of financial empowerment that Islam gave to women way back, right of property. So here we are in the 21st century, and what do we have? Girls are being forced into marriage, when actually in the Quran, the women, marriages between two consenting adults of sound mind, right? And that's not what we have right now. We have young girls being married off to much older men. But it's because the girls are burdensome to their family because of poverty. And so that's what you're seeing is this, they say it's Islamic for these girls to be married to older men, for them to be married off at such a young age, and to be forced into marriage even. So there's such a lack of understanding of what the Quran actually says. So these are some of the issues that we go through. But here in America, the women are educated, and they know better, and so they're not going to put up with it. And so I'm going to marry whoever I want, because the Quran does not say that I have to marry a Muslim. And so they've empowered themselves. So we provide those services because the traditional mosque will not marry a Muslim woman to a non-Muslim man. So we provide those services. So that's just an example of the type of women's rights issues that we here in America deal with. LGBTQ rights. This is, here in America, this has been up front and center issue. We at MPV, we've been addressing this issue for a good 8 years, back when it wasn't the cool thing to advocate for. So we look at it from perspective of human rights. We look at from a perspective, if God created LGBTQs, they are born this way, why should we condemn them? At the end of the day, we are human beings. We're not the one to judge, period. And actually, there were homosexuals during Prophet Muhammad's days. Nobody got condemned. Nobody got hung for it. Nobody got punished for it. Why are we doing that now? So we're going back to the roots. We're going back to the examples of Prophet Muhammad. Critical analysis and interpretation. As I was showing earlier on, our community is very, very diverse, old, young, converts. And it's really funny. I'm getting emails from gay non-Muslims who want to convert to Islam. It's like, are you out of your mind? Given what we hear in the news, right? But this is what's happening. So what we're finding is the common denominator that we have in our community is that everyone, regardless of what their social status is, they come to Muslims for progressive values because they engage in critical analysis of scripture. And they look at it from a much more pragmatic perspective. They are not dogmatic. And even if they're Sunni or Shia or Sufi or Ahmadiyya, or no matter what denomination they are, they've risen past that denominational interpretation of Islam, and they look at it as, you know what, I'm a Muslim. Because at the end of the day, everything else is man-made, which is true. Everything. The only thing that is written in the Quran is that you are Muslim with a small m, a believer. We are all believers. So, compassion. And this is very simple, but it's not actually very simple in practice, is it? We all know that compassion is a challenge. It's for us to rise above our ego, for us to reach out to the other, for us to walk into the other's shoe. And this is something that this is really, before every verse in the Quran except for one, we always start with this Arabic phrase, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. And God is gracious and merciful. And here we are as human beings, far from it. And I think we are, as human beings, who are being challenged. God has played a mean trick on us. God has wired us to be malicious, to be calculating, to be judgmental, to be hateful. And then God says to us, for you to come meet me at the end of creation is for you to be all that you are not. So this is the jihad, the internal jihad that we have to become a better human being. And compassion is one of them. Diversity, as I quoted in the first verse, the verse that I said, it's about diversity, because otherwise God would have created all us the same. Same language, same tongue, same race, same religion. It's very simple. But obviously we are here to appreciate the diversity. So that is the essence, the backbone of the thinking of our 10 principles, and that what defines us as progressive Muslims. So in promoting our progressivism, the crux of it is obviously education. We believe that progressive Islam, because Islam is inherently progressive, so when we talk about progressive Islam, it's not an alien concept. We want to go back to it, we want to highlight it, and we want to teach that. Art is a powerful tool, as I expressed earlier on, and we have a documentary that we partner up with a progressive Muslim organization out of the UK, and it's called Ijtihad, which means critical analysis, feminism, and reform. If you happen to be in Washington, D.C. on December 10th, we're going to be screening this documentary at Capitol Hill. Lecture series, LGBTQ rights in Islam, and this is a new project that we've undertaken, and this is a scholarly study and a lecture series that goes back into the social, cultural, and political context of homophobia in Islam and Muslim nations. And it's very, very comprehensive, and it'll be up on our YouTube channel in the next month or so. Eid Prayer 2012. So this video, it's 2.5 million views now. But this is our community in Los Angeles. We don't segregate when we pray. And here, in this case, there's a young lady leading prayer, and we don't segregate also because in Mecca we don't segregate when we pray. So why should we segregate in mosques? And we also don't segregate when we pray because we are truly brothers and sisters. There is no sexual arousal when we are praying beside each other. And that's often the question that I get. Don't you feel something when you're praying beside another man? I said, no, he's my brother. It's so beautifully, you can't express how beautiful that is until you actually experience that. Islam, the prayer process has been so sexualized. The fact that women have to be covered, that's another form of sexualization of the woman's body. The fact that a woman's hair cannot show, that's the sexualizing of a woman's body, our voice. I couldn't sing because my voice was sexual, so a man's voice is not sexual? I know plenty of male singers who are very sexual. I don't know about you guys. So this is the form of practice of Islam. It's very egalitarian. And after that, we actually participate in a communal singing as well, which I will share with you later on. In this particular case, the young woman, she is leading prayer, and she's saying it in Arabic, followed by English. And a lot of the complaints on this channel, on our YouTube channel, is the fact that we're doing in English. Our prayers are erased. It's not relevant. It's not accepted by God. Yes, they are God. They know what God accepts. So it is really appalling because Islam, the Quran clearly states, this book is for all people, for all times. It's not for just in Arabic and for that particular time 1400 years ago, and we're supposed to live our lives based on that 1400 years ago. It's for all times. And so the language of our prayer needs to be relevant to the society from whom the prayers are for and from whom it's being performed by. So the fact that we're doing in English, that's our language. and the fact that we're doing it in Arabic because Arabic is beautiful, because that's a common thing that brings us Muslims together, is because we were born and raised with this Arabic. From the time we were born, Arabic was spoken into our ears, no matter what country you are from. So this is our. I'm showing this picture and I'm explaining to you because it gives you an in-depth understanding. When you see the visual of our community, it's real. So we started in Los Angeles, now we're in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Columbia, New York, Chicago. And in Canada, we have 2 chapters, Ottawa and Toronto, in France, Chile, Australia, Malaysia, and South Africa. And we are trying very hard to establish a chapter or an affiliate in the Arab world this year. In December last year, we got our United Nations consultative status. This takes us to the next level. We are no longer just an American organization. We are now a progressive Muslim movement, and there are other ad hoc organizations in various Muslim countries that are also progressive. So, with this United Nations affiliate status, it enables us to be more vocal and more visible on the international level. So now we're going to be able, everything that I say and the values that we advocate for, we can actually do so on an international level and be effective in that way. And have an audience as well, an international audience. So, I am going to sing a song for you. This song is called In My Soul. The reason that I created, as a songwriter, again, I decided to create a body of, a collection of songs that is much needed in our society here in the United States. There's been music in our traditions, primarily in the Sufi tradition, but a lot of the spiritual and religious songs are in languages. It's in Arabic, Persian, Urdu, and whatever other Muslim societies, ancient societies there are. They are not in English. And the other factor is that they're also in an Eastern musical scale. So I'm classically trained, so I decided, well, why not? Why not create a collection of Islamic songs that are rooted in our old tradition lyrically, but is modern in its arrangement and its musical scale. So I'm going to sing this song. And there's a part in that goes, and it's because it's classical, and I know you'll recognize the inspiration of this music, and I'd like for you to sing along, please. And if you don't mind, I'm going to also take a picture of you too, because I like documenting audience reaction, if I may, okay? All right, and it's going to go on social media, so just so that you know, okay? All right, Nicholas.
Soul, there is a temple, shrine, a mosque, a church where I kneel. Prayer should bring us to an altar where no walls or names exist.
So that was the lyrics from that song was from a ancient Iraqi poet, woman, and she is very popular in the Arab world. And her, as you can see, her lyrical content is very beautiful, very inclusive, and that was the essence of Islam back then, centuries ago. And I wanted to take something, like I said, that was really rooted in Islamic tradition way back when, and then adapt it. And so we sing this song after our prayer services as a community. So the next song I'm going to sing is called Prayer of Light. And this song, the lyrics from this words is supposedly, tradition has, is Prophet Muhammad's favorite prayer. And he was known to have said this prayer sitting by himself, by a pond, reflecting. So he's, according to Hadith, our tradition, this is said to have been, he is heard to have been using these prayers. So I took the lyrics, I adapted it a little bit, but with very, very minor changes. And it's really beautiful how it has become, it's rhythmic in its own. And so this is Prayer of Light.
Grants me light in my heart, light in my grave, light in front of me, light behind me, light to my right and light to my left, light above me, light below me, light in my bones. Oh, Allah, increase my light everywhere. Oh, Allah, grant me light in my heart. Light within myself, light on my tongue, light in my eyes, my ears, light in front of me, light behind me, increase my light.
I'd like to invite you to visit our website, Muslims for Progressive Values, mpvusa.org, to sign up for our newsletter, to share with us your thoughts, and for you to share also what we post to your community and your friends and your enemies and so on and so forth. Spread the word for us, please. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
if you'll raise your hand if you have a question for Ani, we will bring a microphone to you.
Thank you. Progressive Christians read their scriptures dialectically. We understand it as both word of God and word of human beings at the same time. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if progressive Muslims do the same in interpreting their scripture.
Yes, absolutely. At the end of the day, we are filtered, what we understand from sacred texts is filtered by our own worldview. Sometimes, for myself, given what I shared with you about my upbringing, I read that. I read that sacred textbook from a filter of inclusiveness. We get accused of being picky, choose what the text that we want to subscribe to, but then I turn around and say, well, you are doing the same. You are picking the more, your interpretation of intolerance is also unacceptable, because when you're taking sacred texts based on historical context and then manipulating that on your particular belief, you are obviously a person who is intolerant by nature. Because why would you take something out of context in that way? So progressive Muslims tend to be that way as far as its critical analysis. It's looking for the sacred text. And in this particular case, some of it is very historical in context. It was revealed at a particular time for a particular purpose. We tend to look at it from a more abstract, obviously, and to take the value from that and how that applies to us in the 21st century. And like I said, I keep going back to this, is that it's a book for all times. So it has to be read in that way. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. I was wondering about the places that you have spoken at, if there's some places you've spoken where you've been afraid, or some places where you've been surprisingly welcomed, and about some places you'd like to speak.
All the places that I've been invited to are very inviting and very welcoming, such as this, critical thinkers yourselves. There is one place that I've never felt frightened. I don't do this if I was frightened. But there is a place that I would love to address, and that would be the ISNA Convention. The ISNA Convention is ISNA is an umbrella organization in the United States, and it's conservative. And I would love for them to give me the podium, but I doubt that would happen. So that would be a Muslim audience that I would love to challenge, yes. I spoke in Denmark about a year and a half ago, and at the Royal Danish Denmark Library. And that was a very mixed crowd, but it was also a long conversation, lots of Q&A. And there were some hostile individuals in the audience, but because it was such a public sphere, being in the public in itself there's a comfort in that. So no, I don't. Otherwise, it's all good. Yeah.
Could you talk to me about the symbol, the eight-sided star in the tree?
Yeah.
What that means?
Yeah. So the eight-sided star, that's a very. It was also rooted in our own tradition, artistic tradition. So you'll see a lot of ceramics of the eight-pointed stars. The tree is life and bearing fruit. I think Islam is very Islam is very in the Quran. There's passages about being caretakers of the environment, of the earth. We as human beings, and obviously we have not been doing that. And we feel that the tree bears that. And the 10 branches are the 10 principles. Yeah. So that's the logo.
Thank you for being here. I have 3 of your books, and the 2 Qurans I haven't digested, but the Natural Republic is terrific. It seems to me that most of the problems non-Muslims have with Muslims are because of the hadith. It isn't the Quran if one spends any time with it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so maybe you could tell us a little bit how that came about and why people accepted that. Were they illiterate and couldn't read the Quran, or what happened?
So the Hadith is a collection of writings that was put together, that was compiled 100 years after Prophet Muhammad died. And the writings claim to be what the Prophet said, right, 100 years after he died. So the Hadith, there are some good Hadith and there's some awful Hadiths. With Muslims for Progressive Values, we don't accept the hadiths that contradict the Quran. So that's the parameters. If it contradicts what the Quran says, we exclude it. We sentence it as irrelevant and as man-made. Man as an M-A-N, the man. The Hadith explains to us how we should worship. The Hadith gives some of the beautiful stories that I shared with you about, the lady that threw trash in front of his home. That's also from the Hadith. So there's some really good stories in the Hadith as well. But at the same time, there's some Hadith that's incredibly misogynistic. And it's unfortunate that a lot of that misogynistic writings have become the accepted ones. And that shapes some of the Muslim how Muslims practice Islam. And the fact that it contradicts the Quran, for whatever reason they are, I guess if you're misogyny, then you're going to go with what justifies your belief, right? So I don't understand it myself, why Muslims come to us, but the Hadith says this and the Hadith says that. And I said, but I'm sorry, but this Hadith contradicts the Quran, verse this and verse that. So what are you? Are you a Muslim or are you a worshipper of Hadith? So that's what I say to them. And they will not be able to come back. They don't have a comeback for that, because it's obviously that I'm pointing out to them, you're elevating the status of Hadith, which is just man-made, 100 years after he died, and pulling that status equal to the Quran. And if you suppose a Muslim, Quran is God's writing, it's God's word. So you go figure that one out, and then you come back and argue with me. Yeah. Is that okay?
Well, thank you. Shukran, my limited Arabic. I'm really very appreciative of this. In studying Muhammad, who I have the utmost respect for, the only aspect that I can't get around is the marriage or the consummation with Aisha. And everything I've studied, it's anywhere, she was between 7 to 9 years old.
Yeah.
How have you kind of wrapped your arms around that aspect?
So I think it depends who you're asking to and what scholars you're reading, because there's been a dispute about that age, and that she was actually 16 and 17. And so, but for me, who cares what age she is? It's the fact that that was at the time that it was, and the fact that it is also hadith, right? What's unfortunate for me is that they use that particular hadith to justify child marriage in the 21st century, right? So that for me is unacceptable. Beyond that, I don't really dwell on that particular issue, because I don't think that is also actually accurate. But I'm not a scholar of hadith, nor do I claim to be a scholar, period, of Islam, but I just have read what I speak about and studied. And so what I've studied for a couple of years is condensed in 50 minutes, essentially, was what I've just done. As far as going back to hadith, since this is a hadith issue, when we get these hate mails from right-wing Christians, what's really amazing is that they just cut and paste hadith, vile hadith, that is being propagated by right-wing Muslims, the ones that would advocate for child marriage, the ones that would advocate for wife beating, right? And so, until we Muslims get rid of this understanding, and we are not going to be able to battle Islamophobia, because all they have to do is cut and paste from what Muslims themselves are saying. So when Muslims talk about Islamophobia, let's take care of our own backyard. Let's clean up our own closet first. That's what we need to do. Because once we clean that out, there would be no source from which this Islamophobia is coming from. So.
As a younger woman, you looked at the Quran and Islam and made the decision to commit or not commit.
Yeah.
What is it about that drew you, that draws you now to that?
It's my home, right? I think you just know it when it's your home and when it spiritually connects with you. But it's also because that was what I was raised in, and so that's comfortable for me, and so that lends, that is a value that makes it home to me. But having said that, I'm also comfortable in a church. I'm comfortable in a synagogue. I feel spirituality outside, sitting at the Grand Canyon, sitting under a tree. So I'm that sort of kind of Muslim. But Islam and the worship, the way that we worship, that resonates for me. Yeah.
We have a question over here.
You briefly spoke about your parents. What do they think about your current campaign?
Sorry, I briefly spoke about?
You briefly spoke about your parents, and you're taking economics and that in school. What do they think about what you're doing now?
My dad's passed on, so he's not able to see this, but my mom is completely against it, and that's been a bit of a challenge. I was sharing this personal story, but I can share it with you too. That is the video of us leading prayer. There's a video of me leading prayer, and my sister is a Sharia law lawyer, and she's a graduate of Al-Azhar University. Al-Azhar University is the Sunni institution. It's equivalent to the Vatican having a university and all, and graduating all these scholars from the Vatican. So you obviously think like the Vatican, and it's the same with Al-Azhar University. It's very conservative. So she posted the video of me on. And shared it with my mother, and so all hell broke loose, and so we had some major disagreements. So that's been a very challenge. Even though I try to avoid the topic, it's not something that I even raise, but it's a topic that, unfortunately, for my mother, she's become. Like I said, I have a problem with using this word conservative, because I don't think it's conservative when you are prejudiced and when you think that women are lesser than a man. And this is the same woman that taught me these good values, but now her understanding of Islam has shifted, as a lot of Malaysians now. They look at, there is this is really appalling. There is a club or a society that started in Malaysia, and it's called Women's, what is it called? The names escape me tonight. But basically their interpretation is women have to be subsidiary to men, and that the path to heaven is obedience to the husband. And your obedience to the husband is the only way that God accepts your prayers. This is so appalling, because Islam is about direct connection with God. It's not through another individual, it's not through a man, it's not through your husband. And so this is the kind of Islam that my mom subscribes to now. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that. So my sister and I, we have we don't have a relationship, so let's put it that way. I've actually blocked her from my Facebook page. So. But her being a Sharia law lawyer expert, and myself being a Muslim activist here in the United States, I've done some study of Sharia myself. And the fact that every few years that I go back to Malaysia, the Sharia law in Malaysia changes. And so I challenge her on that. So if you say it's God's law, why does it change every 2-3 years? And it changes at the expense of women, right? So she can't argue with that. And of course, we end up with an argument. But what's really speaking about Sharia and all that, like Sharia law, not only the law part is man-made, but it's also political. It's an extrapolation of the Quran, but it's also made up of laws that were from pre-Islamic social norms. It is made up of social norms of the day in that particular century. And so the political system of the days that would coalesce these laws and put these things in some sort of a law edict, and then they would go to the religious clergy that they pay and says, okay, this is your role now, and put it into law, this is now a religious law. And this is how Sharia law evolved. And so when people say Sharia law this and Sharia law that, well, what is Sharia? Which Sharia law? Saudi, Morocco, Malaysia? Which one? If it's really Gaza, why is it not uniform? Why is it not consistent? Because it's not. So this is some of the challenges that this is what we challenge traditional Muslims. And that gets us a lot of flack. But that's the root of the argument that I have with my sister and my family. Mm-hmm.
You talked about kind of a shift in the last 25 years or so from the complete, true, pure Quran to what a lot of the mainline Muslim organizations follow, or religions follow. What caused that shift? Do you think it was political? Do you think it was... what do you think?
So 25 years ago, the Islam that I was raised on was much more loving and compassionate. It wasn't as judgmental or harsh like it is now. And I'll give you an example. In Malaysia, our traditional clothing is very colorful. It's loose, because it's tropical, and it covers, your skin, because direct sun is what makes you hot. So when I go back to Malaysia every few years, you go to the night market, and you could always buy the national Malaysian outfits ready available. But in the last 10, 15 years, whenever I go back, I will not be able to find them. What I am able to find readily available is these black, gray, beige sort of light coats that you throw over your street clothing. So it's become, I don't know what. If you go to African countries now, from their colorful cultural clothing, they are now wearing all black. Right. So this is the Saudi interpretation of Islam. You cannot celebrate the birth of Prophet Muhammad. In Malaysia, we celebrate Prophet Muhammad's birthday with prayer and songs. And in many Muslim countries, they do that. But with the advent of Wahhabism, that influence has really tempered those practices. So it's not just in the 25 years, but in the last 25 years, that's been the trend. In America, we see that, and they will build these nice fancy mosques, right, in the United States, and they will, who doesn't want a nice fancy mosque? And so they will say, well, then this is the books you will use, and this is the agenda, and we will send you our imam, and so on and so forth. So that's what's been happening in the United States. With 9/11, that has curtailed. A lot of the Saudi preachers have been kicked out. But the influence is still there. If you belong to a traditional Muslim community, one of the reasons I started the Muslim community was I'm an immigrant. I wasn't raised in a Muslim community in the United States. And so attending the traditional community that I was a part of before I started engaging in this, going on this educational journey, it was very cultural, and it wasn't my culture. So I felt that starting up my own community was important, an American Muslim community. And so the 25-year shift is not to say 25 years ago it was purely a Quran form. No, Islam has always been culturally influenced through the years, through centuries. That's why the Islam is described as the water that flows over the rocks. The culture comes through. You can see the rocks, but Islam flows over it, right? So every country has its cultural expression of Islam, and we're doing the same thing in America, and we have the right to do that. So when people challenge us, especially me in particular, was why are you doing this Western scale music? Why do you even do music? Like, I can challenge that easily. Why there's a Chinese Islam, there's a Malaysian Islam, there's an Afghani, and so on and so forth. Why can't we have an American Islam? If anything, it's probably more truer because of the equality and the egalitarian and the justice for all. Let's practice that. So, yeah.
I'm a Christian preacher, and I've heard you talk tonight, and a lot of what I heard was your struggle with your own tradition. So in some ways I kind of feel like I walked in on my neighbors fighting and I don't really know what to do. So what would you say to someone like me about how I can best be a partner with you in the work that you're doing?
Thank you. I think the most, when Dark Brew puts this up on their website, please share that. That would be a great first step. Obviously, social media is great, sharing what we post on Facebook, and if you sign up, I think that would be, thank God for internet. We've been able to propagate and grow our community that way. The other way, I'm assuming you're from here, from this city as well, is to partner with Muslims. And I don't know what sort of Muslim population they are until there's about 3,000, but I don't know what type of Muslims they are. I mean, if they would agree with what I said, or they probably would disagree with what I said, or a combination of the two. I mean, no two human beings agree on everything, so that's the richness of our Creator. So, but I would not compromise on your particular progressive values, and I say this because I've seen a lot of progressive Christians and temples, synagogues that would partner up with Muslim organizations, and they would do so with conservative Muslim organizations, and compromising their own progressive Christian values or Jewish values. And what they do is, by doing that, they empower, in my opinion, the conservative elements, which are not exactly friendly to us. So I think I would make that effort to seek out progressive Muslims, and because we need help, because there's this element. I'll share you a bit about Muslim communities here. There's an element about shame in our Muslim community, and sometimes you have to shame them into doing the right thing. And I think as outsiders, that would be a very effective role to play. Mm-hmm. So that's the trick.
We have a question over here.
Do you have people in Arab countries that are reaching out to you?
Yes, absolutely. Just so that you know, only 18% of Muslims are Arabs. The Arab world has been reaching out to Muslims for progressive values, and that happened in particular when I was guest on an Arab show in Egypt, and it was hosted by a very well-known Arab host on satellite television, and it was all on the issue of women leading prayer. And he had a Muslim Brotherhood clergy on the panel. I couldn't see them, they could see me, so it was very unfair in that sense as well. The whole hour was about women leading prayer, and for them, how hell is frozen over, the end of the world was near. And obviously I was arguing otherwise. But the beautiful part about that was that that interview was broadcast throughout the world on satellite. And I got emails and phone calls from Arab men, oddly enough, not from the women, but from the men, indicating that what we were doing was the right Islam, was the true value of Islam. We have had our Arab Revolution, they say. Now it's going to be the Islamic Revolution. So it's bubbling over. You see this angst in the Arab world. You're addressing the Arab world, but it's not just in the Arab world, it's the Muslim world in Malaysia and many parts of the Muslim world, the majority Muslim countries. They are just so pent up. They can't stand this oppression. They can't stand the lack of freedoms. They can't stand the lack of freedom of thought, of expression, of just liberating themselves from being able to express themselves no matter what it is, whether it's Islamic or not, right? I can't imagine living in such a society. So they want to be Muslim because that is their identity. They are Muslim, but the Muslim that has been imposed on them is not the Islam that they want. They want a liberating Islam. And that's going to happen. Like it or not, it's going to happen. It's going to be brutal getting there, though. Yeah. That's cute.
I think it was on your website that I read, which I thought it was interesting, but I think people don't understand why the prophet can't be pictured. But then I read on the website, it's not only the prophet, it's all the prophets in the Bible, and the reason for it, correct me if I'm wrong or misunderstood, but the reason is for it is they don't want people worshiping these prophets or idols. They want them only to worship and pray to God, not to some prophet.
Yes, correct. Yes, that is correct. That is the reason behind it, but it's obviously taken to another level, right? So there are actually lots of artwork with the image of Prophet Muhammad. There would be his figurines, but his face would be like a fire or a light instead of his actual features. So there's beautiful artworks with his image, but not face, but the storytelling aspect of it. And that is why Islamic art tends to be not even flowers, but it tends to be symmetric and calligraphy and things like that. But has been taken to such an extreme. So when you have this cartoon depiction of Prophet Muhammad, yes, they were very, very vile. They were very wrong. They were so wrong on so many levels. But the fact that people were demonstrating and killing as a result of it is really over the top. At the end of the day, are you going to be worshiping these cartoons? No. At the end of the day, are you actually going to be worshiping whatever image that is in front of you? It's all about your intention. So before we pray, we always say a niyat is our intent. What is it what is the niyat, what we're praying? And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. It's what's in your heart and praying to the Creator. So this image concept is taken to an extreme. And the thing is, it's the art is more of an elite awareness and not so much of the underprivileged. So the art is collected by those who have money, who have wealth, who have the capacity to the leisure and the luxury of going to an art exhibit. It's not something that is affordable to the poor. And so there's that class and economic disparity as well that plays into it. And what better way than to rile up people angrily in protest wrongfully about an image that is vile? Why bring even attention to it? And why even bring yourself to that level? It's definitely not worth dying or killing someone over. That's not Islamic. So, yeah.
All right. How about we give a round of applause for our guests tonight? Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, let's give Ani a chance to get out of here first. Eric, if you want to escort our dear guest here. And then if you guys would please join us in the foyer for some refreshments and conversation, we would love to have you. Thank you so much to each of you who came out tonight to hear Ani speak. Thank you.